Oh, hello there. Yes, well, it has become Friday. Hooray! Yes. Just got one more week to go, and then I can sit next to my cat in bed, which would be really nice, or perhaps he can sit next to me. Both. That's really nice. Yes. Anyway, today I thought we'd ponder the imponderable. Is GB News a racist station? Yeah. Yeah. It was quite amusing to a certain extent over the last sort of 48 hours to watch various GB News presenters getting very, very, very upset about the notion that they might be Islamophobic. There was Michelle Dewberry, who had a bit of a go at Aaron Bastani. Link down below if you want to watch that. It's quite interesting to watch him squirm. Now, Navarra Media undoubtedly have had long discussions about whether or not they should do GB News, and I guess it is worthwhile bearing in mind how long Aaron Bastani has been there to actually sort of plonk him up against, in this case, Richard Tice, because let's face it, you wouldn't need much intellectual prowess to make him look like an idiot, but this is GB News, so such things don't actually happen. But she was very, very indignant about the notion that people would report this as news. The thing about her show, of course, is it's one of the better ones, because she has the 6 to 7 slot, which means that if you think of GB News as the British Fox network, there are certain times when they have to be a lot more newsy than others. There are certain times when you can watch Fox News when it will give you the news, and other times when it will just give you Republican propaganda. And it's exactly the same with GB News. You know, if you want to sit down with a Coast guy on Sunday evening in the kind of God slot, you're welcome to it, but you're not really going to get news from that. So she tends to have a half-decent programme. Most of her right-wing guests are the usual suspects, like Richard Tice or Kelvin Mackenzie. People who are, I'm afraid, racist. I'm sorry, but they just are. But, to a certain extent with them, of course, you can, it just astounds me that these people are prepared to assert that they just aren't racist. I mean, we had this from Darren Grimes. There are attempts to smear broadcasters for their coverage of issues around Islam in an attempt to silence said broadcasters from approaching the topics at all. Mark my words, the discourse around cousin marriage will be deemed Islamophobic by the end of the week. Yes, because it is, Darren, okay? Now, you might well have lots of arguments as to why first cousins shouldn't marry. One of the things about it, though, oddly, is it's not illegal in this country. We'll come on to that. But if you look at what the others that have left GB News do, they are incredibly racist now that they are freed from the shackles of having to appear, or at least pretend not to be racist. And the thing about this first cousin thing, particularly with Pakistanis, is it's a very, very convenient way of slipping into what we might call scientific racism, which is the way that racists say, oh, well, it's just the fact. Okay, and I would point you to, well, Rafe, our good friend of the channel that he is, and where was he? Oh yeah, he was appeared on TriggerPod, where he was discussing the enormous problems that there are around first cousin marriage amongst the Pakistani community, I know, which has a much higher prevalence than it does in the UK. But, you see, I was having my sociologist head on with this, so I'm just going to read the stuff to you, because he put up quite a long piece on his Twitter feed. The ban on cousin marriages is one explanation for the origins of the West's genius and exceptionalism. I discussed this with in my TriggerPod interview, yes. Harvard's Professor Jay Heinrich argues that Western mind evolved differently and was a global anomaly because of a 9th century Western Catholic Church's ban on cousin marriage. 9th century. Think about that, just in historical terms. Up to that point, the structures of societies across the globe was defined by the kinship clans, large extended families where your first, second, third or fourth cousins were as much part of your family as brothers and sisters. Yeah, plenty of people do actually live in those kind of kinship groups, and they aren't necessarily Pakistanis, but I'm sure you know some people like that. You know, they insist that their fourth cousins are really good close friends to the family, and I'm thinking, Okay. Anyway, these clan societies were based upon nepotism, obedience to authority, and conformity. Strangers were regarded with distrust and hostility. Again, okay, but isn't that the whole of the 9th century and probably the 10th century and probably the 11th century, probably the 12th century, 13th century, 14th century, 15th century, probably quite a bit of the 16th century, the 17th century, certainly quite a lot of the 18th century, an awful lot of the 19th century, and a blindingly large amount of the 20th century as well. Can be all of those things, can't it? But never mind that, that's just me, well, knowing things. I'm a historian, me, like Rafe is. Yes. Today, 75% of the world still has cousin marriages. Yeah, we do here, Rafe. According to Heinrich, approximately 90% of the world doesn't have the same notion of the exclusive nuclear family that we have. No, because the exclusive notion of the nuclear family that we have, Rafe, is basically a post-war invention. I'm sorry, but that's what it is. You know, I effectively teach sociology for a living, so I really do know about that. It very, very, very much is a notion that was invented to a certain extent, if you want to be generous about it, during the Victorian period. Generous about it, okay? It is not a modern concept at all, and certainly can't trace its roots back to the Pope in 12057 or whatever you want to make up about it. Anyway, with kinship clans destroyed, the nuclear family had to rely on contact with the strangers. This led to the development of high levels of social trust. In the West, social trust is one of the most important criteria for society's economic prosperity and social cohesion. Okay then, with high levels of social trust, these medieval nuclear families were able to come together and cooperate for their mutual benefit. They achieved this, for example, by establishing guilds, crow fraternities, universities and charter towns. Okay, but I'm not entirely sure that was based on the nuclear family, or indeed not marrying your cousin. I think those things are quite separate, but that's just me. These uniquely Western institutions help to foster a cross-pollination of ideas and skills through which innovation exploded. The exclusively Western notion of individualism really isn't, was core to this as well, and much of that is due to Protestantism, yes, which predates all of those things that Rafe says was very, very important if you think about it. Anyway, I explained all this in my greater detail in this video. You can look that up if you can be bothered. Anyway, yes, but the problem, of course, with that particular book when it came out about 4 years or so ago was that people poo-pooed the idea because they said, well, okay, but you know, the whole of Western civilization you can't boil it down to something a pope said in 1202. You just can't. And like I say, the nuclear family is a very, very, very modern construct. You know, at best, you could maybe say the 1830s onwards, at best. And realistically, it's a post-World War II concoction because, you know, I don't know about you, but I grew up in an extended family. Wasn't particularly heavy with cousins, but there again, I don't think I would really want to marry any of them anyway. Don't want to marry anybody, come to think of it. But if we think about this notion of marrying cousins, of course, we do run into all sorts of problems with what we might call, you know, actuality or the facts or that scientific thing that Rafe seems to have so much faith in. I'll point you down below to an 1875 study, which I had a glance at, about first cousins and whether or not it leads to insanity. And the author, the Society for Statistical Research, discovered that no, actually, because the same percentage of nutters in the nut house had married their first cousin as in the wider society. Now, if you want to talk about people stifling innovation due to interbreeding, surely we can look no further than the European royal families. And they were the ones running everything for hundreds upon hundreds of years. Yeah? Yeah, so where did all this innovation come from, if not an awful lot of first cousins marrying each other? Again, which is still legal in this country and does happen a reasonable amount. Most of our ancestors who lived on farms pre-1600 would have married their cousins. So most of this stuff effectively goes out of the window, just on a statistical basis. I'm not saying all of them, But this notion of people travelling and moving and not basically having a lot of close contact with their family and trusting in strangers, which would lead inevitably to the guilds and inevitably to Western hegemony, just isn't a thing, Rafe. You can make it up, but it's looking suspiciously like yet more racism. It's just another way of having a go at the brown Muslims. Or is that just me being, a bit horrible to GB News? Well, no, because that's their stock in trade. It's what they do. It's written on the tin. Or at least it was basically written on the tin, because they wanted very much to be the British Fox News. And they got it. Yeah, that's what we get. The major component of culture war is race, and that's their stock in trade. Sorry if that upsets Michelle, and she's probably the best of the lot of them, but as to how Darren Grimes can say he's not a racist, I mean, that's just fall off stool madness, isn't it? Oh yeah, that's right, he's got some gay black friends that he invites on the show, so he can't be, can he? No, it's not the way it works. Anyway, longer video today, more time, weekend beckons. Do have a good one, if you can.